All right. So I'm going to zoom in again to around 100%. Whoops. To zoom in on my image, not my tools, not the browser, I have to click on the pixels of my image. All right. So I'm at, here we go, 100%. And I just used levels. So if I look in my history, window history, I can see that when I opened it, it looked like that. And then I did levels and I made a little adjustment. I brightened it up a little bit. The next direct adjustment we're going to do, I want to show my layers again, all right, is in this second section, which are all the color adjustment tools. And the one I just love is color balance. Now, there are a lot of tools here. Some of them are very, very professional tools, like curves is what most of my professional friends will go to first. But curves works on lots of things all at once. It's not the most intuitive. So we get to it by using levels, color balance, and hue saturation. There are 3 of the ones that have shortcuts. They are by far the most helpful. Invert is only if you're doing political attack ads, right? That's really extreme. So if I do that, really extreme. Though it looks kind of cool. Yeah, I'm considering, but no. All right. So first, you go on the layer that you're working with. I'm working with this one on top of my background. And I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. Color balance is the temperature of the light. Right now we're inside. There's yellow fluorescence. So all of our skin tones, everything on our desks, all is being mixed with a yellow light. So everything's warm. Your pixels might have a different color temperature than the ones you're trying to blend them to. And just like levels, you want to start with the midtone range. So under range, you're going to select midtones first, and then the first, you're going to work up from the bottom. Always preserve luminosity. You're going to decide, do I want to push it more towards yellow? You can see that there. Or more towards blue. Which helps it match the mountain better? 0 is doing nothing. Negatives are going towards yellow. Positives are going towards blue. So to my eye, it needs to go a little bit towards yellow. Okay, next, I'm going to push it a little bit towards the greens, which really makes that greenery pop, but that greenery wouldn't really pop from that far away, right? Or more towards the magenta. And that actually helps that greenery to not be so, to be back in the atmosphere a lot. And then towards reds, or towards the cyans. And again, towards the cyans helps make it match. Now I can also do highlights and shadows, but I don't need to for this background. But I can just maybe warm up the highlights a little bit. You can play with it. And then the shadows, maybe I just take it down away from the reds a little bit. So it looks like these, because I don't want to see too clearly that it's red ceramic tile or that it's really bright green trees. So now this really looks like a mysterious structure, that's huge up in those faraway mountains. All right, next, go into 100%. We've done levels under image adjustments. We've done color balance. The next big one is hue saturation. This one is for big color changes. You don't always need it, but if nothing else works, this will. You can change the spectrum of the color. Now, with all of these, you don't want to do it too much or things get really blasted out and noisy, unless that's what you're going for. Like they'll look glitchy. But again, do I like it more towards the infrared side or more towards the ultraviolet side? And it looks like a little bit more towards the infrared. And then the really helpful one is saturation. Saturation is the intensity of the color. Color is a wave that has a certain frequency. So red has a certain frequency in the wave. But you can have the same red with the same frequency that's really, really intense. And that's called the amplitude of the wave. How energized is that wave? So if I really up the saturation, now all of those same colors, color frequencies are maximum amplitude. And they look, crazy intense. Or if I take them all down, they actually eventually lose all of their color strength and just become grayscale. Black, white, and gray are not colors. So that's why we adjust those with levels. So I'm going to decide to actually just take the saturation down just slightly. Do not play with lightness, the lightness slider on hue saturation, because you can control that much better with levels. It's an imperfect tool here. Like if I just darken everything, it just looks muddy. If I just brighten everything, it looks muddy. But if I wanted to go back and use levels to brighten everything, I can control it from the midtones and the shadows. All right. So let's look at our history and see, come on, work with me, if we like what we did. So we started, it looked like that, then we did levels, then we did color balance, then we did hue saturation. Very subtle changes, but it helps it all match. As we go from the background forward, it's all going to make a lot more difference. So for instance, if I actually start not on that building layer, but on the sky layer, I can start with levels. This is why there's the advantage of going from the furthest back forward. So I start with levels. And I think I already did this a little bit last class. Like I wanted it pretty bright to show off Olympus. But if I wanted it all to be darker, 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 like moodier, which I'm kind of feeling today for some reason, then I would start it with levels and push it that way and maybe even limit some of the highlights. Nice and moody. And now the challenge would be getting this layer to match. But I not only could play with levels, I could also play with the color of that background. Image adjustment, color balance. So instead of it just being so typically blue, why don't I push it a little bit more towards the yellows in the shadows, but I want to start with the midtones. Push a little bit more towards yellow and magenta, yeah, and red in the midtones. Kind of that angry sky. Then with the shadows, I'm going to push it towards the blues. So it's almost purplish. Yeah, that's looking more dramatic. And then in the highlights, I push it a little bit towards the warmth again. And the cyans. And now that looks a lot more dimensional. So if I look at my history of the sky, went from that to that to that, right? And now with hue saturation for the sky, image adjustments, hue saturation, the third one, I can play with its whole spectrum. Now I could try to find one that works for the architecture, but I'm going to have to adjust all the architecture again. But I kind of like those pink clouds and the kind of unrealness of it. It is mythology after all. And believable just means that it follows its own rules, right? So I can have kind of crazy color spectrums if I want. So now, how do I make things match? Because we were doing such subtlety before. So now I have to take this layer, I'm going to zoom in so I can see it, around 100%. And now I use those same tools again, so image adjustment levels. What's great about this is it doesn't directly change your pixels, but it's always shifting them so that they should work if you shift them again, right? All the pixel content's still there. So I'm going to darken those midtones. Right? And then you can see how the color temperature is off. So I go to image adjustment, color balance, and I'm going to go to midtones first. I'm going to push it more towards yellow, more towards magenta, more towards the reds to help it match. Shadows, I'm going to cool off a little bit. Actually, I'm going to warm them a little bit. So it's always kind of pushing them on both sides, seeing what works. And then in terms of highlights, I think I need to go a little bit more warm. And less green. All right. Now that I've done that, I'm going to play with hue saturation. And you can move this so you can see what you're trying to blend. And I'm going to play with the intensity. And I'm going to push it a little bit away from ultraviolet and a little bit more towards infrared. And I'm going to take that saturation down a bit. And now its color temperature kind of works. Come on, do it. I'm going to hit Command S because it's lagging on me a little bit. But you see how the shadows, if I squint, the shadows are stronger than they should be to match the mountain. So then I can always go back to levels, right, for lights and darks. Because sometimes if you do big color shifts, it will make it look like darker values sometimes. Especially because red has a pretty dark value in terms of color. So how can I play with this? I'm actually going to limit the shadows. And goose the highlights. Like that. So it looks like it all fits a little bit better. Yeah. Yes. You will always zoom straight in, but once you're zoomed in, if you hit spacebar, come on, it will turn your cursor into the hand, and then you can click and drag and pan around. Yep. Yeah, just these navigation things, the zoom in, the zoom out, the fit it all on screen with Command 0, and the holding down spacebar to pan around once you're zoomed in. All of that's very, very helpful as we're trying to judge our edges. Okay, here's the last trick to make them match, right? You can see that the building artifact here is matching much better than this building, and that's because it's been partially erased. So because this is so far back in the background, and there's just sky behind it, right? I can just take the opacity of that layer down a little bit to mix that sky into it. So it's at 84%, or maybe I want it at 90%. And then I can always use my eraser tool to blend it. And we always use the eraser with a soft edge, 0% hardness. And the things I actually want to get rid of, I can totally get rid of with the 100% eraser. But then when I want to blend and kind of merge things together, then I could take the opacity down once the hard edges and kind of step things into each other. As long as I'm not blowing holes into things that I need. You know, like take down the opacity on this wall a little bit. All right, so that's my Olympus up on the mountain peak. Now that I've made those color decisions pretty dramatically different from my history when I opened, right, coloring wise, it's with those direct adjustments, levels, color balance, hue saturation, that you can make all of your layers match. So now I'm going to go to the next layer, which is this one. And it has all that big blue sky. And before I even try to erase that sky, I'm going to play with those three settings. So I go to Image, Adjustment, Levels. The shortcut is Command L if you want to use it. And you can see there's almost no darks in this image at all. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the midtones to be more dramatic. Maybe limit the highlights a little bit. Actually, no. They're pretty good. Yeah. Then I'm going to say, okay, now that color is, remember, levels is not a color adjustment. It's just a values, a lighting adjustment. Now, color balance is my favorite one because it's going to really